For a long time, the world's oceans seemed to operate on a predictable set of rules. Well, that era is over. A new, great game is afoot, and it's a high-stakes contest for power and influence across the vast Indo-Pacific. How this game plays out is going to define the world map for the 21st century. Think about it. For more than 70 years, the maritime world really revolved around a single massive pillar, the United States Navy. And this wasn't just about having the most warships. It was about underwriting the security of the sea lanes, the very arteries that keep the global economy alive. That was the deal, the foundation of the whole system. But that old status quo, it's cracking. China isn't just an economic story anymore. It's building a world-class navy to match its global ambitions. And Beijing is using all of its power, both commercial and military, to literally redraw the map and write a new set of rules for the region. Now, this challenge didn't start with a bang, not with a naval battle. It began with something a lot more mundane, concrete and steel. You see, China's first big move in this great game has been a brilliant campaign of economic strategy, turning things like ports, railways, and bridges into powerful geopolitical chess pieces. This is the famous Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Now, officially, it's pitched as this grand plan to build infrastructure all over the world. But strategically, it's a blueprint to shift the entire center of gravity of the world economy towards Beijing. The goal is to create new highways for trade and energy that the U.S. Navy can't easily pressure or control. So let's look at a case study, the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. This is the textbook example of how that economic power can turn into strategic control. Sri Lanka took on huge loans from China to build it, couldn't pay them back, and was ultimately forced to hand over control of the port to a Chinese company on a 99-year lease. This is what people mean when they talk about debt trap diplomacy. But, it's not that simple. That whole debt trap idea gets a lot of pushback from the countries actually taking the money. As Djibouti's finance minister points out, they see these as sovereign decisions for their own development. It's a crucial reminder that these nations have their own goals and aren't just pawns being pushed around on a board. And this is what really worries Western strategists. That line between a commercial port and a naval outpost is getting very, very blurry. In 2017, China set up its very first overseas military base in Djibouti, right next to the port it helped finance, and, get this, practically next door to a major U.S. base. Analysts now believe that most of these Chinese-backed ports could be used by their navy, creating a global network of strategic footholds. So economic influence is one major pillar of the strategy. But where money and influence aren't enough, Beijing is shifting to something much more direct, physically claiming territory. And the main stage for this is the most hotly contested body of water on Earth, the South China Sea. So what's the fight all about? It boils down to this, the 9-dash line. It's a huge, sweeping claim Beijing uses to say it has historical rights to about 90% of the sea. The problem? That line cuts right through the internationally recognized waters of Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and others. It's a recipe for constant tension. To make this claim a physical reality, China has launched one of the biggest engineering projects you can imagine. Since 2013, they've dredged up sand and coral to create over 3,200 acres of new land out of thin air, basically building military bases on top of what used to be underwater reefs. And let's be absolutely clear. These are not tourist destinations. They are full-blown military fortresses. We're talking military-grade runways, sophisticated radar systems, and batteries of anti-ship and anti-aircraft missiles. They've effectively created a chain of unsinkable aircraft carriers in the middle of the ocean. Okay, so building these islands is one thing, but how do you control the huge expanses of water around them without starting an actual shooting war? Well, you use something called gray zone tactics. These are actions that are definitely aggressive, like using water cannons on other countries' ships, but they're designed to stay just below the line that would trigger a military response. A perfect example of this is what's known as the cabbage leaf strategy. You take a target, say a small Philippine outpost, and you surround it in layers, like a cabbage. The outer layer is a swarm of hundreds of so-called fishing boats, which are actually a state-run militia. Inside that, you've got the China Coast Guard, and in the layer behind them, the official Chinese Navy warships. They just slowly squeeze until no one can get in or out. All right, so you can't push this hard with economic pressure and military intimidation without getting a reaction. And that's exactly what's happening. The United States and its allies are now putting together a comprehensive counter strategy to push back. Now, the heart of the American strategy isn't to take on China alone. It's to double down on what it considers its biggest advantage, its massive network of allies. The whole idea is to create a web of security partners that together can act as a powerful counterweight to China's ambitions. Two groups are really central to this effort. First, you have the Quad. That's the US, Australia, India, and Japan. Think of them as a high-level strategic forum. Then you have AUKUS, Australia, the UK, and the US. This one is much more of a hard power military pact, focused on sharing top-level technology, most famously, of course, giving Australia nuclear-powered submarines. And this chart shows you exactly why AUKUS is seen as such a big deal. The US has a big lead in aircraft carriers today, no question, but look at China's goal for 2040. They plan to double their fleet. The thinking behind AUKUS is to counter China's growing numbers with a decisive technological advantage, making any potential conflict much more complicated for Beijing to plan for. But here's the catch. China knows it doesn't have to match the US carrier for carrier. Its real trump card is a massive web of sophisticated land-based missiles. This creates what the military calls an anti-access/area denial bubble. Basically, a giant keep-out zone designed to make it incredibly risky for a US carrier to get anywhere close to China's coast. So we have these two immense, competing strategies colliding. One is based on building island fortresses and missile shields, the other on weaving together a network of alliances. So what's really on the line here for the rest of the world? Well, the stakes really couldn't be higher. We're talking about the fundamental principle of freedom of the seas, the idea that the oceans belong to everyone. That idea has been the foundation of global trade and prosperity for decades. And right now, that principle is being challenged more seriously than at any time since the Second World War. And that leaves us with the critical question. As these two systems clash and as both sides maneuver for position, the entire global order is being put under incredible strain. The question is no longer if the rules will be tested. The real question is, will they simply bend, or will they shatter completely?